you can save the most animals. Effective altruism. Thanks, Jordan.
Hello. My name is Jordan, and my talk is about this idea/movement called effective altruism. And so I'm going to be talking about how you can save the most animals using effective altruism. A little bit about me. My background is in economics and philosophy, where I looked mostly at policy and animal ethics. I am the head of Effective Animal Advocacy Australia, which is a new group that I'll talk about later on. I'm also the head of Effective Altruism Perth, which is a local group, and one of the things that it focuses on is how we can help the most animals, in addition to other things. And I'm also a volunteer research assistant for the Australian Alliance for Animals, which I'll talk about a little bit later as well. So, what would you choose? If you had a choice between saving one animal and saving 100, what would you do? And that seems like a really strange question, right? It's really obvious you would save more if you had that choice. But we are in that situation. And that's what I'm going to be talking about a bit throughout this presentation, is how we decide to address problems makes all the difference. And sometimes the differences are enormous. So I'm going to talk about what I'm going to cover. So the first is what effective altruism even is, and then effective animal advocacy, and what effective animal advocacy looks like in practice as a movement, how you can get involved, and then finally it's going to be creating your own plan. So this is a workshop, so it's not just about thinking, it's also about doing. And hopefully by the end of this talk, we have some ideas of how we can start applying this, even starting today, or the near future, just having some kind of clear plan. So first, what is effective altruism? So it's a new philosophy and global social movement. And it's focused on the question, how can we do the most good? And so because that involves really complex evaluations, it's this huge research field. So that's one of the big two parts of it is research, trying to understand what the biggest problems are and trying to understand what actually works. And then it's also a practical community. So it's not just sitting around thinking, it's, okay, what am I going to do based on this incredibly powerful knowledge that I now have? So the principles of effective altruism, the first one is open truth seeking. So we're probably not going to be able to figure out which problems are the best to work on or which solutions work best unless we're willing to challenge our views, our first impressions, unless we pay attention to the best evidence and we think carefully about these issues. The second one is prioritization. So we should be focusing on finding the very best ways to help others and doing that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The third principle is impartiality. When we want to help others, we should do that impartially, which means giving everyone's interests equal weight, regardless of where they're located, or what their species is, or whether they exist today or tomorrow. And the final one is collaborative spirit, so work together and be nice. So you might notice that, well, you may have come away with the impression that a lot of groups tend to spend a lot of time infighting. So it's like one of the core root principles of this movement. Don't do that. Just build each other up, help each other, we're on the same team. Just, make it easy for each other. So effective altruists have kind of landed on three problems. So because they look for the problems that are the largest in scale, the most neglected, and where real progress is possible. So we don't want to work on issues that only affect a handful of people. We don't want to work on issues that are already having a lot of effort on them because probably a lot of progress has already been made. The best opportunities are probably being taken. And we don't want to work on issues that are just fundamentally unsolvable. But if we focus on issues that are very large in scale, massively neglected, and where progress really is possible, then there's going to be awesome opportunities there. And so the three issues that really fit that description are extreme poverty and global health. So there's about 700 million people as of this year who are extreme poverty. They live on less than $2 a day. They can't afford extremely basic necessities. The second issue is catastrophic risks. One of those is nuclear war, but there's also pandemics worse than COVID. That is a real risk. Advanced artificial intelligence. We don't know how to make that safe yet as it gets more powerful. And then there are some other risks as well. And then the third one, which we're here for today, is animal suffering. And the biggest example of that is factory farming. So something that's special about effective altruism is trying to quantify impact. So rather than relying on intuitions or first impressions, actually going through the process of trying to figure out how we can quantify different opportunities. So I'm going to show you an example of what that looks like, a hypothetical example. So first you analyze impacts. So what is actually achieved? So how many people or animals were helped? So in this hypothetical, we've done something and that has saved 1,000 animals. So how much were they helped? So it could be that you've slightly helped 1,000 animals or that you've completely saved them from something horrific. So in this case, we're imagining that we've completely saved them from, a horrible existence on a factory farm. And then the second step is you analyze costs. So what did it take you to achieve it? So how much money did it cost? So in this example, whatever we did, it only cost $100. And how much time did it take? Well, maybe it took 10 hours. And so then once you've done these, you can put them together. So the benefits were 1,000 animals saved, it cost $100. And for this example, we're just going to look at the money side. So then you get cost effectiveness. So whatever we did, how cost effective was it? And once you divide the 1,000 animals by the $100, you get that each dollar saved 10 animals. So now we've got this cost effectiveness evaluation. Then we can take the next step. So once we have that, and we do that for different approaches, we can rank them and we can compare them. And so when you do that, what you find is really shocking. So the most effective approaches save usually 100 times as many animals as typical approaches. And we see this across the board with different problems. The typical approach, the best approach is usually 100 times better than the typical approach. Okay, so that's quantification and cost effectiveness analysis and why it's important. So what is effective animal advocacy? Well, you might have an idea of that already. So effective animal advocacy is effective altruism applied to animals. So it asks, how can we save the most animals? And so then it's a whole research field of which problem should we work on if we want to save the most animals, and which solutions actually work in saving the most animals. And then it puts that into practice. So there's a whole practical community trying to save the most animals based on this research and applying it in their own life. So now I'm going to talk about some of the principles of effective animal advocacy and how the principles apply in this problem. So the first one is open truth seeking. And you might also have your own opinion about how common this principle is among advocacy movements in general. So this is also called scout mindset. So this involves finding the best evidence, conducting original research if it's really important and it doesn't exist yet. So thinking carefully about the evidence that does exist, and changing your mind when that is appropriate. So don't just stick with your guns no matter what. So the second principle is, as we mentioned, impartiality. So that applies in caring about animals, non-human animals. So equal consideration is given to all animals, regardless of species, similarity to humans, or the way we use them. And if they are sentient, if they can suffer, they are completely in. So where we draw the boundary, if they suffer, they're in. They matter. Their experience matters. And the well-being of sentient wild animals, fishes, insects A lot of insects are sentient. And prawns. There's good evidence that prawns are sentient. So that matters, just as much as the well-being of pigs and cows. And equality means that we should save the most animals. And the reason for that is if that each individual counts for one, so equality, then more counts for more. So the third principle is prioritization, as I mentioned. So our resources, our time, our money, our energy are seriously limited. Unfortunately, I don't have infinite money, so I can't solve all the world's problems as much as I would like that. I don't have infinite time, I don't have infinite energy. Otherwise I would just solve everything. So we cannot save all animals. So that means we must make difficult decisions about which animals to save. And we are making those decisions whether we're honest about it and whether we confront that or not. We're always choosing to save some animals and not others. And so what this means is that we should prioritize opportunities to get the very most out of the limited resources that we have. And this is the compassionate option. So in emergencies, we expect medics, and they are legally required to adhere to this approach that's called triage. So effective altruism also offers a really powerful tool for making these decisions about what we can prioritize. And that's the framework, importance, tractability, and neglectedness, which I'm going to explain now. So when comparing different issues, even animal issues, we use this framework. So the first step is evaluating how important is it? And what that means is how many animals are affected and how severely are they affected. The second step is tractability. It's also called solvability, which is how much progress would be made on this problem if it had significantly more resources trying to solve it. So some problems, they're just completely unsolvable. You couldn't even make progress, unfortunately. But some, they're very solvable. If they had just a few more resources, a lot of progress would be made. And the final one is neglectedness. So how many resources are already being used to work on this problem? And the reason why this matters is we typically see that it's called diminishing returns. So basically when you put a bit more in, you'll get less and less out of it as you keep putting more in. As the best opportunities are taken for people who work on problems that there's a lot of people working on it. And so the higher an issue scores on these three criteria, the more effective additional resources will be. So this tells you where to look. But this does not mean that any response to the problem is equally effective. So once we know where to look for promising opportunities, we must still find the most effective responses to the most urgent problems. And so one implication of this framework is that we should focus on factory farming. And in general, the most important animal issues are the most neglected. So over 95% of farmed animals are factory farmed, especially in developed countries. For every human, there's about 3 to 4 animals currently in factory farms. And I probably don't need to explain to this audience that they live in complete misery. It's basically hell on earth. And it is extremely neglected, especially compared to companion animals or conservation. So in 2016, a study by animal charity evaluators found that only $1 in every $7,000 of charity was for helping farmed animals. No, so for animal-specific charity, I think it's 1%. Yeah, so 99% of animal-specific charity goes to like companion animals and charismatic wild animals and stuff like that. So, but you can apply this framework yet again. So even within factory farming, there's a similar issue where the most important populations are the most neglected. Well over 99.9% of factory farmed animals are chickens, fishes, prawns, and insects. And we should be paying significantly more attention to these populations than we currently do. And I think that this massive neglect, especially of fishes, prawns, and insects, even within the animal movement, tend not to know all that much about, like they would know way more about how pigs are treated, how chickens are treated, know very little about how fishes are treated, or prawns or insects. I think that is due to a kind of residual speciesism and size bias. And here are two new organizations from an effective animal advocacy background that are trying to correct that really massive gap. So that was effective animal advocacy in principle. And so let's see what this looks like in practice. The first step is useful research. So you review the best research that already exists, compile it, you summarize it, and you share it with advocates. So information is power. The next step is to identify critical gaps in our knowledge about important problems and the effectiveness of different solutions. So effective animal advocates have created several research organizations to meet this need and massively increase our knowledge and effectiveness. And these are just some of them. There are even more than this. So working on general research, Social Change Lab analyzes how effective are protests, how effective are social movements. Animal Ask is trying to figure out which strategies work best. Animal Charity Evaluators ranks different charities based on cost effectiveness. Yeah, and I'll just move to the next bit. So one of the main findings from this research is that we really should be focusing on an institutional approach. So that means focusing on changing governments, firms, social norms, and we can do that by targeting influential decision makers. So this is how other social movements have had the most success. And by focusing on persuading regular individuals, we can save thousands of animals, right? But by focusing instead on decision makers and systems, we could save millions or even more animals. And so the Australian Alliance for Animals is one example of that. It is a new organization working on systemic change. And there's also a really cool article in Nature that you can read for free called Institutional Change and the Limitations of Consumer Activism that will go into way more depth on that topic. So the second approach that's extremely effective is developing alternative proteins. So these are plant-based meat alternatives that are made from plants to taste like meat, cultivated meat grown from cells, and alternative proteins could become less resource intensive than animal farming currently is. They could become even cheaper and outcompete animal protein. And, oh, there's a typo there. So once people have cheaper alternative proteins that have outcompeted animal proteins, they'll stop being as much in denial about how horrific factory farming is. If you no longer think that you benefit from something, you're much more honest about, okay, yeah, that's kind of messed up. And so that should increase public support for a ban of a factory farming sector that's declining. And the Good Food Institute is one example of an effective animal advocacy organization, and they push for favourable policy for alternative proteins. They push for government investment, and they've had some cool success with that. And they support the development of alternative proteins, so that's research, and also how can we commercialize this and scale it up. Then there's investigations. So investigations, whether they're undercover or hidden cameras, these are incredibly effective ways of raising nationwide awareness, shifting attitudes, shifting behaviours, and raising support for systemic change. And Farm Transparency Project and Mercy for Animals are two examples of that being done incredibly well. And then there's capacity building. So one organisation that does this is New Roots Institute. So they outreach to high school classrooms about factory farming, its consequences for animals, its consequences for the environment and public health. And they work with the enthusiastic students to enter policy internships and run their own outreach seminars. So it's a self-sustaining, really cost-effective model. And animal advocacy careers supports advocates to enter high-impact job opportunities with effective animal protection organizations. And I can talk a bit more about them later. Another approach that's really effective is evidence-based messaging. So there are several effective animal advocacy organizations that have conducted research into which communication techniques are really the most effective in changing perspectives and behaviors. You may have heard some arguments about this among activists, like, oh, we should be more intense, or oh, we should be more patient. So the Center for Effective Vegan Advocacy is one of these organizations, and they have free online courses that are based on this research. So one is on effective vegan advocacy, one is on sustainable vegan advocacy. There's no point picking an advocacy style if you can only keep that up for a week. And finally, the science of effective vegan advocacy. So you can figure out how to evaluate research that's being presented in defense of opposite conclusions. And then focusing on the largest and most neglected animal populations. So including in developing countries, the animal movement is quite small, new, or non-existent in many developing countries. Focusing on fishes who make up the majority, is it the majority? It might be the majority of farmed animals. Prawns as well. There are, I think, billions of farmed prawns, and we just don't know much about that, nearly as much as we should. They've been able to get away pretty much with no one knowing what they're doing or trying to make sure that they stop harming animals. Insects. So there's really cool recent evidence that a lot of insect species are sentient, including the ones that we farm or just spray with poison gas. And so this is a massively neglected issue. And finally, wild animals. So for every animal in factory farms, there are way more farmed animals. And it seems like we should be trying to help them to the extent that we can. But we just don't know very much about how to do that for each, in a way that will help each individual animal. We obviously can't attend to each individual animal, so we need to find other ways of helping. And then I want to talk about Effective Animal Advocacy Australia. So this is a new community group. It was started after the founders, including myself, met at the annual Effective Altruism Australia conference in September last year. And so we all thought that there was a really critical gap in animal advocacy in Australia. And so we wanted to fill that. And so we're pretty much a network of committed animal nerds. And I'll talk a bit about what we've done. So we are focused on institutional change following the research and the arguments I mentioned before. And we are here to support anyone on their pathway into high-impact roles in animal advocacy. So we regularly post high-impact job and volunteer opportunities. I took a look and there were 20 in the last month. We run high-impact workshops during critical policy windows. So when the government is saying, hey, this law really needs a review, this needs to change, those are incredible opportunities to change what the law is. And so we did that. So with Victoria's Pig Welfare Inquiry, Farm Transparency Project provided ABC with some extremely disturbing footage of CO2 stunning in Victoria's pig slaughterhouses. This shocked the nation and led to a public inquiry. And the terms of reference of this inquiry, which is just the scope of what's covered and what is going to be affected, it was extremely broad. So it included what is international best practice? How do we stack up against other countries? Not very well. The system of governance, regulation and its effects on animal welfare standards. So not just pig standards, but where did this all come from? Has something gone wrong further up the chain? And finally, also confinement practices. So thankfully, they didn't limit it to stunning techniques. And so this was a rare and exciting opportunity to make a huge difference for millions of pigs. And if we can affect how the system is governed, how animal welfare is governed in general, are all farmed animals in Victoria. And if they can set a precedent, that can have effects on Australia. So, in light of that opportunity, we decided to run workshops to help advocates make evidence-based high-impact submissions. I guarantee you that industry groups never miss an inquiry, they never miss a submission. They know that these are important. So similar workshops have had great success when used by other effective altruist organisations in Australia, and they have led to significant policy changes. And so we conducted weeks of intense research, and we corresponded with a large number of experts. And so we were looking for arguments, evidence, and asks that would make the biggest difference to pigs and all farmed animals in Victoria, which is, by the way, one of the biggest farming states. I think it's probably more than a quarter of animal farming in all of Australia. But we also wanted to put forward a case that had the highest chance of being implemented. And so we focused on their whole life in factory farms rather than just slaughter techniques. And we also focused on the system of government that leads to consistently poor standards for pigs and all farmed animals in Victoria. And for a brand new group, started a few months ago by a couple of people who just met up in Melbourne, we got incredible turnout. We had more than 100 participants nationwide. We received so much support from the vegans and animal advocates in Perth as well. And thanks to the support that we received, thanks to the support that we provided to the participants, most of them made in-depth, high-impact submissions, and they did it easily. And we'll find out very soon how many animals will be spared from the worst cruelties of factory farming due to these workshops. They've delayed or they've extended the inquiry, so I think it was due last week, but there's been an extension. And there are some photos of some of the turnout we had, and people making a submission and getting laws changed. So what's next for this group that we started, focused on effective advocacy? So one thing that we're really excited about is doing some research and publishing reports on aquaculture, which is factory farming of fishes. They're done underwater or indoors in buildings. We're also concerned about prawn farming and insect farming in Australia. It's really difficult to find information about how these operate, how many animals are affected, what the welfare issues are, and how they're regulated. So we're going to try and fill that gap. We're going to keep running workshops, and we want to extend to workshops on how to meet with representatives and corporations to effectively discuss animal protection issues and changing the mind of some decision makers. And pretty soon we're going to have submission workshops for the National Animal Welfare Strategy, which is, it's a strategy to make them consistent but also improved and in line with international standards. So this is a chance to affect all of the animals farmed in Australia. And anything else that we think will make the biggest difference. So that's what effective animal advocacy looks like in practice. And now I'm going to talk about pathways and how you can get involved. So the first option is to volunteer for effective organizations. So there's a group called Vegan Hacktivists, and they have an online volunteer board, and it's for IT requests. So any kind of website design or coding. If you have any kind of IT skills and you'd like to offer them and support the movement, they've got a board with, at any given time, like a dozen open requests. The Animal Justice Party, which is very focused on institutional reform, and they always need volunteers. Farm Transparency Project, their investigations are really important, and they opened the policy window that we were able to seize. So that work's really important. To toot my own horn, Effective Animal Advocacy Australia, if you want to, we would love more volunteers. And there's also a website called Effective Altruism Opportunities Board, and it's got a filter for animal issues. And at any given time, they have a few dozen entry-level volunteer and paid positions with high-impact organizations. So yeah, volunteering. Another thing you can do is give what you can to the most effective organizations. So, as I mentioned, the best animal charities save 100 or even 1,000 times more animals than typical charities. So there's one research organization called Animal Charity Evaluators. They do rigorous research into which groups save the most animals per dollar, and they have a list of recommended charities based on this assessment. And then they also have an impact fund, which they disperse 100% directly to all these charities, based on what each charity needs at the time. And then they also have a movement fund, so kind of taking bets on really promising groups starting up in either developing countries where the movement is really small, or if they've got a really exciting plan to fill a gap in an existing a country where the movement already is kind of established, then yeah, it can get them off the ground and get them running. And then there's another organization called Giving What We Can, and you can take their pledge to give between 1 and 10% of your income to the highest impact charities. And 14,000 people have already done that, so you can join them. It's much more meaningful than a one-off donation. Another thing you can do is advocate for effective animal advocacy. If you agree with what's been presented so far, then if you can convince just one other person to choose high-impact pathways and opportunities, that could double your lifetime impact and the number of animals saved. Most animal advocates aren't aware of these ideas or opportunities, and you could even send them this presentation once it's been uploaded to our pages. Another option is to select an effective thesis. So if we have any university students in the audience, effective thesis, they can help you select a research question for honours, masters, PhD that will significantly benefit animals and empower the movement, and that's their website there. So some really promising areas of research that you could do as a thesis involved farmed animal advocacy, welfare reform, alternative proteins, wild animal welfare, and understanding of social progress and change in social movements. And then we've got high impact careers in animal advocacy. You have about 80,000 hours in your career, and when it comes to helping animals, this is your biggest decision by far. So you could take your advocacy from a couple hours a fortnight, if you're doing that already, to full-time without financial sacrifice. Research by animal advocacy careers has found that these jobs are not more competitive than similar private sector positions. So they have the same rate of acceptance. If you've got a similar level of qualification, you're just as likely to be hired by one of these jobs. And so one of the main research organizations that focuses on effective careers in general is 80,000 hours, and they've got a free career guide, a bunch of research and support. And they also do counseling, one-to-one counseling for free. And then, yes, animal advocacy careers itself, they have an active job board where you can see all of the places that are currently hiring. They're focused on high-impact organizations. They have a free online course and certificate that is appreciated by these organizations when they're hiring, where you can learn even more about effective animal advocacy, and you can learn more about the job market in animal advocacy as well. And they have the same free resources of research and one-to-one career counseling sessions, and that's their website there. If you want to learn even more about these ideas and this movement, The Impactful Vegan is coming out in June. The End of Animal Farming was written by a head researcher at one of these groups and focuses on an institutional approach. How to Create a Vegan World presents the case for pragmatism, and you can get free copies, and I can talk to you about how you can do that. And then there's a podcast. It's not about shrimp, it's just a funny title. It's called How I Learned to Love Shrimp. So it's a podcast on effective animal advocacy, and so far it has 26 episodes with movement leaders. You could also join us, so Effective Animal Advocacy Australia or Effective Altruism Perth on website, on Facebook. Effective Altruism Perth also has a website. We run local events where we meet up and discuss this stuff. We also have workshops, so I mentioned the pig welfare workshop. We've run a bunch of other ones as well. It's not just animal issues. And yeah, a community of people who have similar goals, similar ideas. And so this is the exciting bit. So it's not just talk, it's not just thinking, it's time to create your plan. And this is the workshop section. So if you will kindly scan this QR code with your phone, and if your phone is flat or something, we can give you a physical version. It is time to take action. So now that you know what effective animal advocacy is, you can take your first steps to saving the most animals. So this QR code opens a Google form. It will take only a couple minutes to fill out, and you will automatically receive a copy of your personal plan by email once you're finished. And we'll spend at least the next minute just dedicated to that. Oh, and if you can't use the QR code for whatever reason, and you'd like a physical copy, just raise your hand and we will hand one out. Does anyone else need a physical copy? All right, sorry to do this a bit quick, but if you're still working on that, you can finish that in just a second. So, that's the end of the presentation workshop. Thank you. This is the first time I've done this presentation. Are there any questions? Yep. I think there's really good evidence that bees are sentient. It depends on the kind of insect as well. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I can't remember off the top of my head which ones. Yeah. Yes, sorry.
I thought insects were the most socially structured society that there was.
I don't know that much about kind of how insect worlds are structured really in terms of their social, how the social structure. I think there's some kind of quote about how communism should be applied to bees because they do it really well. It's like one unit. Yeah, so I think they are incredibly linked together. I don't know that much about their social life beyond that. It can also depend on the species of insect. Imagine some of them are solitary, whereas other ones, they're part of a hive. Yeah. Yes.
How
Yeah, so if you want to look through this again, I'll be uploading it on both Effective Altruism Perth, the Facebook page, and Effective Animal Advocacy Australia, that Facebook page as well. It will probably also be shared to Perth Vegan Expo, if not the website, then their Facebook stuff as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Jordan, from EA Perth, and their stall is just over here, so if you have any further questions, you can always visit them there today or tomorrow. And then coming up in about 15 minutes, we actually have some spoken word poetry performances. At 5:30 we have Astral Jacks Avenue, and then at 5:50 we have Swordfish. So please stay around for that or come back because the expo is not yet over. Thanks everyone.